Canada is emerging as a powerhouse in North America, quietly transforming trade and industry while the U.S. faces mounting challenges. What hidden shifts are pushing American jobs, investments, and opportunities north of the border? Canada is quickly building a comprehensive manufacturing empire, attracting massive billion-dollar investments from global giants like Volkswagen, Stellantis, and GM. Ontario and Quebec have become hotbeds for EV battery and material plants, with Volkswagen's St. Thomas Gigafactory alone receiving a record-breaking 13 billion Canadian dollars in government support, as reported by the Globe and Mail in May 2025. This marks a historic turning point for Canada's auto sector, shifting the industrial spotlight northward. For U.S. industrial states like Michigan and Ohio, this new reality means job cuts as car makers and suppliers shift production across the border. Thousands of manufacturing jobs are moving, leaving American workers and communities facing growing uncertainty about their economic future. The U.S. now relies heavily on Canadian sources for key minerals, such as lithium, nickel, cobalt, and rare earths, crucial for EVs, smartphones, and advanced weapon systems. Under the U.S. IRA law, car makers only get tax breaks if minerals come from FTA, partners like Canada, making Ottawa a strategic supplier. In August 2024, the Pentagon made headlines by investing $20 million in a cobalt refining facility in Ontario, according to Bloomberg, a move described as unprecedented in defense supply chains. If Canada controls the mineral flow, the U.S. faces higher risks of production, delays for EVs and defense tech. Disruptions could hit American industry and energy security directly, causing price spikes, slower innovation, and threats to domestic jobs. Ottawa has signed more than 10 major trade agreements beyond the USMCA, including deals with the EU, UK, ASEAN, and CPTPP, opening access to over 1.5 billion consumers. Globally, the Financial Post noted, in the fourth quarter of 2024, Canadian exports to the EU surged 11.4% and over 14% to the UK, while exports beyond the US jumped 7.4%. Meanwhile, US companies are trapped by retaliatory tariffs and complex export rules, struggling to stay competitive. US goods are losing market share, with supply chains disrupted and investors favoring Canada as a gateway to global markets. American producers, from agriculture to tech, feel the squeeze, putting local businesses at risk and narrowing consumer choices. Since April 2025, new tariffs up to 50% on Chinese and EU imports have raised average U.S. consumer prices by 2.3%, costing each household $3,800 more annually, as estimated by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. In contrast, Canada's GDP grew by 2.2% in Q1 2025, attracting $50 billion in foreign direct investment and creating 413,000 new jobs last year. Retailers like Costco have rerouted supply chains through Canada to dodge tariffs, illustrating a shift in North American commerce. For Americans, higher prices, stagnant wages, and the loss of quality jobs are becoming the new normal. As manufacturing strength drains overseas, U.S. communities face lasting economic challenges that threaten long-term prosperity. Walmart, the largest retailer in the United States, is currently facing unprecedented challenges as it proceeds to close multiple stores and reduce its workforce by several thousand employees, largely due to pressure from newly enacted tariff policies. Can the nation's supply chains and consumer prices stabilize in the near future? Amid the implementation of new trade tariffs, Walmart has announced plans to close a number of stores, and cut approximately 1,500 positions across its global technology, e-commerce, and advertising divisions. This move is part of a broader restructuring strategy aimed at simplifying operations and addressing the growing challenges facing the retail sector in the current economic climate. The closure of stores and workforce reductions not only affect employees, but also have ripple effects on local communities, especially in rural areas, where Walmart often serves as a major employer and a primary provider of essential goods. With tariffs on imported goods reaching as high as 145%, Walmart has experienced a significant increase in import costs. In response, the company has adjusted its retail prices to offset these expenses, resulting in a 20 to 30% increase in the cost of essential items such as food, household goods, and electronics over the past few weeks. Consumers, particularly those with lower incomes, are feeling increased financial pressure as the cost of everyday necessities continues to rise, placing strain on household budgets and impacting overall quality of life. The closing of Walmart locations affects more than just the company's direct employees. Local businesses, such as restaurants, gas stations, and laundromats, that depend on foot traffic generated by Walmart, are also experiencing declining revenues. As communities lose access to a key retail hub, residents are forced to travel farther for basic shopping needs, while facing reduced services and fewer amenities within their neighborhoods. To adapt to current conditions, Walmart is accelerating its adoption of automation across retail operations, including the use of robotics, artificial intelligence, and automated checkout systems. Additionally, the company is shifting its supply chains from China to other countries such as India, Vietnam, and Mexico to mitigate risks associated with tariff policies. While these measures allow Walmart to maintain operational continuity, they also result in lower demand for labor, ultimately affecting job opportunities in local markets. Beyond the retail sector, industries such as automotive, aerospace, and defense are also grappling with the effects of recent tariff measures. Disruptions in the availability of imported components and raw materials have led to temporary factory shutdowns, impacting thousands of jobs and causing delays across global supply chains. Workers in these sectors are facing heightened uncertainty about job stability, while consumers may continue to encounter elevated prices and product shortages in the marketplace. The U.S. economy is navigating a complex terrain, shaped by rising tariffs, a weakening dollar, and shifting investment flows. How will these dynamics influence everyday life for Americans? The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, has revised its U.S. GDP growth projection for 2025 downward to 1.6%, a significant drop from the 2.8% growth recorded in 2025-2024. This adjustment is primarily attributed to the substantial increase in import tariffs implemented by the Trump administration, which have disrupted global trade and supply chains. The heightened tariffs have led to increased costs for imported goods, resulting in higher prices for consumers on everyday items. Industries such as retail, automotive, construction, and technology are experiencing increased operational costs, which may lead to job reductions and decreased consumer spending power. The OECD also projects that inflation, as measured by the Personal Consumption Expenditures Price Index, will rise to 3.9% by the end of 2025, potentially delaying further Federal Reserve rate cuts. The U.S. dollar index, DXY, has declined by approximately 9% since the beginning of 2025, reflecting diminished investor confidence. This depreciation is influenced by concerns over trade policies and economic stability. A weaker dollar increases the cost of imported goods, contributing to higher inflation and affecting the purchasing power of consumers. Additionally, it can lead to increased interest rates on loans and mortgages, placing further financial strain on households. Financial institutions like Goldman Sachs anticipate that the dollar could slide by as much as 10% over the next 12 months, signaling potential challenges ahead for the U.S. economy. In response to economic uncertainties, investors are turning to gold as a safe haven asset. Gold prices have surged to record highs, reaching over $3,300 per ounce. Higher yields often mean higher borrowing costs. For those looking to buy a home or finance large purchases, monthly payments may increase significantly. Additionally, market swings have hit retirement accounts and savings plans, eroding long-term financial security for millions of Americans. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that if 10-year yields average 4.4% over the next decade, it could add an additional $1.8 trillion to the national debt, potentially leading to higher taxes or reduced government services. Global investors are reallocating capital to markets perceived as more stable, such as those in Asia and Europe. This shift is driven by concerns over U.S. trade policies and economic direction. Less foreign investment could slow job creation and delay infrastructure upgrades across the country. In the long term, continued capital flight raises the risk of economic stagnation or even recession. Without adequate funding, critical sectors may struggle to expand, limiting opportunities for workers and businesses alike. Analysts at J.P. Morgan Private Bank note that the dollar has not exhibited its usual safe haven status in 2025, indicating a shift in investor sentiment. A new $25 trillion trade alliance among ASEAN, China, and Gulf nations is reshaping global commerce. As the U.S. steps back from multilateral deals, is a parallel economic system emerging? At the recent ASEAN GCC China Summit in Kuala Lumpur, leaders announced a strategic trade alliance encompassing ASEAN, the Gulf Cooperation Council, GCC, and China. Collectively, these regions represent a GDP of nearly $25 trillion and a population of approximately 2.15 billion people. This alliance aims to deepen economic integration through initiatives like the ASEAN-China Free Trade Area, ACFTA 3.0, and a proposed China-GCC Free Trade Agreement. China's significant investments in infrastructure, including high-speed rail, logistics, and 5G networks, are central to this collaboration. The formation of this bloc could shift global trade dynamics, potentially affecting U.S. exports and influence in these regions. American businesses may face increased competition and need to adapt to new trade standards and practices established by this alliance. Saudi Arabia and China are advancing discussions to price oil sales in Chinese yuan, challenging the U.S. dollar's dominance in global energy markets. Additionally, TotalEnergies has completed its first liquefied natural gas, LNG, transaction with China, settled in yuan. China's cross-border interbank payment system, CIPS, is gaining traction as an alternative to the SWIFT network, facilitating yuan-denominated transactions and reducing reliance on Western financial systems. A move away from the dollar in global energy trade could lead to decreased demand for the U.S. currency, potentially impacting exchange rates and increasing borrowing costs. American consumers might face higher prices for imported goods and energy. Since 2017, the U.S. has not entered into any new comprehensive trade agreements. In contrast, China is actively pursuing and updating multiple trade deals, including ACFTA 3.0 and the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP. Canada and Mexico are also diversifying their trade relationships, seeking stronger ties with Asia-Pacific nations. to reduce dependence on the U.S. market. The U.S.'s absence from new trade agreements may limit market access for American exporters, potentially affecting job growth and economic competitiveness. Consumers could face higher prices due to tariffs and reduced availability of foreign goods. China is promoting a soft power approach by exporting its digital infrastructure and governance models through initiatives like the Digital Silk Road. Projects like Vision 2045 aim to harmonize economic regulations across ASEAN, China, and GCC countries. This strategy could lead to the development of an alternative global economic system, less influenced by Western norms and institutions. The rise of parallel economic systems may challenge U.S. leadership in setting global standards, potentially isolating American businesses from emerging markets and new technological frameworks. Container and car shipments into U.S. ports are facing cancellations and delays, stirring concern for consumers and workers. Could this be the early sign of a broader U.S. supply crisis? Container carriers have scrapped up to 30% of trans-Pacific sailings, cutting 20% of capacity to West Coast ports in April and 24% in early May. Major hubs, Los Angeles, Long Beach, Oakland, saw vessel arrivals drop nearly 50%, from about 12 ships to just 6 per day. Globally, carriers withdrew capacity, equivalent to 1.3 million 40-foot containers, annually, equal to 578,115 TEU. Consumers across the U.S. will notice more empty shelves in major stores, as shipments of popular products are delayed or even canceled. This is especially concerning for families waiting for essential appliances or seasonal goods. Businesses, too, are struggling to maintain normal inventory, forcing some to increase prices to cover rising costs. The logistics industry, already strained, sees hundreds of port workers and truck drivers forced to accept fewer shifts, and many risk being temporarily laid off. For communities dependent on port activity, the slowdown leads to reduced local business, threatening restaurants, shops, and service providers who rely on daily port operations for a stable income. An estimated 37,000 vehicles, including Audi and VW models, remain stranded at U.S. ports since April 2nd, halted by a newly imposed 25% U.S. import tariff. Automakers like GM have paused shipments and are redirecting vehicles into bonded yards to avoid tariffs. Customers looking to purchase new vehicles face long waits, or are pushed to buy older models at a premium. The shortage is not limited to luxury brands. Mainstream dealerships also struggle to receive regular inventory, making it harder for families to access affordable transportation. Price increases may push some buyers out of the market altogether. For dealership employees, uncertainty grows as managers cut back hours or postpone new hires. Those working in car transport, detailing, or parts supply feel the ripple effect. Facing shrinking paychecks, the lack of fresh stock could even force some local dealerships to close, impacting local economies and causing job losses beyond the auto industry. Beyond containers and cars, bulk goods and agricultural exports have been blocked. U.S. soybean shipments to China plunged 41% year-on-year in Q1 2025. Brazil now supplies around 70% of China's soybeans, while U.S. share dropped to 28% in 2022/2023. Without a deeper trade deal, U.S. exports may shrink to 1.5 billion bushels, down from 1.865 billion, risking price declines to $9 per bushel higher costs for food, electronics, and auto parts. Businesses pay extra for storage or cancel orders altogether. Logistics slowdowns hurt workers' incomes in retail, trucking, and warehousing. Despite a 90-day tariff truce, reducing U.S. duties on Chinese imports to 30% from 145%, blank sailings remain high, up to 28% cancellations, and ports stay quiet. No definitive relief or federal plan appears, and regional leaders are pressing for action. Household budgets tighten as prices rise. Middle-class families may cut spending further. Economic recovery slows, reducing room for local support programs and job creation. The world has endured catastrophic hyperinflation and soaring national debt, drawing chilling parallels to today. Could the U.S. be on the same risky path? In November 1923, Germany's papier mark collapsed to 4.2 trillion marks per U.S. dollar. Daily price hikes hit nearly 29,525%, forcing people to carry wheelbarrows of cash. A single loaf of bread reached 200 billion marks. Zimbabwe saw annual inflation spike to 98 billion% in November 2008, rendering local currency worthless and pushing citizens toward U.S. dollars and South African rand. Venezuela experienced inflation rates in the millions of percent around 2018, triggering severe shortages of food and medicine, according to the IMF. Such uncontrolled money printing can obliterate savings and destabilize societies. If the U.S. repeated this, everyday prices could spiral, wiping out middle-class wealth, and with it, trust in the financial system. American families could see their purchasing power disappear overnight, retirement funds eroded, and the costs of essentials, such as rent, food, healthcare, and transportation, rise so fast that even basic planning becomes impossible. Social unrest could follow, hitting the most vulnerable first on and hardest. Since the pandemic, the U.S. Federal Reserve has injected around $2.2 trillion via the CARES Act in March 2020. It further expanded fiscal stimulus, pushing deficits upwards. As of early 2025, U.S. national debt totals about $36.4 trillion, roughly 122% of GDP, increasing by approximately $1 trillion every 3 months. The IMF and Moody's have flagged this debt accumulation as a major financial risk. These policies helped avert a deeper recession and supported millions, but unchecked. Rising debt may drive up interest rates, raise taxes, and slash public spending on healthcare, education, and infrastructure. This would directly affect affordable loans, services, and quality of life for American households. Over time, families could struggle to secure home loans. Small business owners may face higher borrowing costs, and local communities might see schools or hospitals underfunded. Everyday Americans could lose access to vital government support and feel the pressure in their wallets. The U.S. dollar remains the world's primary reserve currency, underpinning global trade in commodities like oil, gold, and grain. During crises, such as the pandemic or geopolitical shocks, investors seek safety in the U.S. dollar, boosting its value and helping control domestic inflation. A strong dollar reduces inflation risk and enables the U.S. to borrow cheaply. However, maintaining this advantage depends entirely on sustaining global confidence in U.S. policies and institutions. Global confidence in the dollar is crucial. No current rival, neither the Chinese yuan nor the euro, is seen as a viable replacement. But preserving that trust demands transparent, disciplined policy and debt management. If that trust erodes, U.S. citizens could face surging prices for fuel and food, costlier mortgages, and heightened risk of economic slowdown or recession. Without a trusted dollar, everyday costs could skyrocket. Families might cut essential spending, while the economy could trend towards stagnation. It underscores that sound policy is everyone's personal concern. Investor confidence in U.S. government bonds is slipping as debt hits new highs and fiscal challenges mount. What changes might ordinary Americans face as financial risks grow? On June 12, 2025, the U.S. Treasury is set to issue $22 billion in 30-year bonds. But global investor faith is weakening. The 30-year Treasury yield recently surged to 5.15%, the highest since 2007. Between November and February, foreign central banks sold a net $19.6 billion in long-term treasuries and shifted into short-term T-bills, signaling rising caution. By January 2025, foreign holdings in U.S. treasuries stood at $8.526 trillion, with Japan holding $1.079 trillion and China $760.8 billion, according to Bloomberg. As trust in U.S. bonds declines, borrowing costs rise. Americans will face higher interest rates on mortgages, car loans, and credit cards, squeezing household budgets and making it harder for families to buy homes or cars. Higher rates also slow spending and threaten job growth, putting pressure on both businesses and workers nationwide. Moody's has cut its outlook on U.S. government credit due to surging debt, now over $36.2 trillion as of December 2024. The annual interest cost is expected to top $1.13 trillion by 2026, overtaking national defense spending. Moody's warns, the U.S. faces rising fiscal and political risks. If deficits continue to grow, if interest payments overtake defense, funding for programs like Social Security, Medicare, and public education may be cut. This could reduce healthcare access, shrink safety nets, and make it harder for families to get support or send children to college. Such cuts would especially strain the middle class, increasing financial stress and making the future more uncertain for millions. While new retaliatory tax proposals, such as Section 8.99, have made headlines, details remain unconfirmed and are under debate in Washington. Financial experts warn any sharp tax hike on foreign investors could trigger capital flight from the U.S. bond market, right as the country faces massive refinancing needs. If foreign capital pulls out, the U.S. must pay more to borrow. This means even higher interest rates for families and businesses. Rising borrowing costs could push up prices for goods and services, while making loans harder to obtain. In turn, job cuts and spending slowdowns may ripple through both public and private sectors, putting even more pressure on American households. The Consumer Price Index rose 0.3% in May, lifting annual inflation to 3.6%. Trump's proposed $250 billion in tariffs on Chinese goods may drive inflation higher. Each 1% increase in tariffs could push core inflation up by 0.4 percentage points, according to Bloomberg Economics. Stubborn inflation and slow growth point to a possible stagflation scenario, where rising prices erode investment returns and investor confidence falters. Stagflation means everyday essentials, like food, fuel, and services, cost more. But wages don't keep up. Millions could see their paychecks stretched thinner, making it tougher to pay bills and cover basic needs. The risk of layoffs and job insecurity would rise, leaving many families facing harder choices and a tougher financial future.